Cette conférence va maintenant être enregistrée.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce myself. I am Magdalena Sabat. I am a second-year PhD student at the DEC. Originally, I come from Poland, where I did my bachelor's in cognitive science as well. And right now, I focus mostly on the neuroscience part of cognitive science. So I'm going to do 2 classes, well, 1.5. This is supposed to be Introduction to Cognitive Psychology, and the next week we should do Introduction to Neuropsychology. But I was thinking how to structure the courses in a way that will best benefit the participants with very little to no background in cognitive science or in psychology or any of the parts of cognitive sciences. So I decided to mix the two a little bit more. So we're going to start with building intuitions about what the science of the mind from the psychological perspective is. I'm going to show you a little bit the history of psychology, what was the thought behind what the psyche is. And then we're going to go through several studies that were very striking, and then you will, if you go into cognitive science or cognitive psychology, you will hear 100 times more about these studies later on, but they're incredibly interesting and very striking when you learn about them, and they give a very good intuition and prepare a very good ground into how do we study the mind and what the mind actually is and how it is understood in their perspective of modern cognitive science. Can you see my pointer? Cool. Okay, cool. So as you've seen in the introduction, the history of cognitive science is quite new and quite early in the development. And the main step that happened that gave birth to cognitive science was the opposition to behaviorism. So as we said, behaviorists looked at the mind as a black box that didn't matter to accurate description of what the mind is. Cognitivism rejected that attitude and said that what the mind is important, and all of the internal processes are very important. And I find it very intuitive, and almost I find it striking that scientists would oppose that idea, because I think all of us have this very very potent feeling that there is something besides how I behave. I have thoughts that I choose or choose not to speak. I have sensations that I cannot just simply describe using words. I feel desires that drive my motivations to different things. And all of these things are impossible to account for from the perspective of behaviorism. So as I said, we accepted that it is important what is in the box, how is the box built, why is the box even there in the first place, and what is in the box, what is that box in the end. But when we talk about it like this, it seems very intuitive, but what is the actual difference from the scientific method point of view? We're going to do a quick experiment. We're going to try to teach our dog a command to sit. And we start with asking the dog to sit and give it, and when it sits, we give it later like something to eat that our dog likes very much. So we do it over 3 days, and we measure their performance. That is, how many times when I ask them to sit, how many times do they actually sit? So on the first day, the hit rate, so the times when they actually sat, was about 20% of the time, which is not very bad, but quite low if you think about it. On the second day, however, the hit rate is already 60%. On the third day, it's 30%. From the behavioral point of view, between the first and the second day, there was some kind of learning that occurred, and the animal, which is measured through performance. On the third day, however, it would look like, I don't know, the dog unlearned whatever we taught them before. However, there are many different ways in which we could explain the lower performance. For example, the dog was not hungry, was not motivated, or our dog actually has an attitude and it only performs when it wants and not when we ask it to. And all of these explanations are not possible within the behavioral method or behavioral point of view. So there's no way to account for motivation. It doesn't differentiate additionally between learning and performance, because performance is basically it's equal to learning in the behaviorist approach. And additionally, no learning can occur before simple reinforcers, which are the associations between external stimuli and behavior. For example, like we know now that we can learn something without explicitly showing that we've learned something. Kids that grow up in harsh environments learn a lot of behavioral strategies that are not explicitly measurable through simple behavioral measures. Cognitivism allows for rich learning mechanisms that incorporate influence of many internal variables that are not available to us observers directly. And it allows for dissociation between learning, the memory, and the performance, etc. So the birth of the cognitive revolution happened when we opposed to that idea of simple reinforcers. And we've already kind of showed that with our simple presentation. Other few main ideas behind the cognitive revolution was the treatment of psychology as a science. Psychology being everything, any science that has to do with the mind or the psyche or whatever you understand behind the words spirit, soul, that will allow to go from testable hypotheses and control methods to creation of complex theories. And for that, it allowed to analyze the behavior in multiple levels. So to go a bit back in time, what the mind actually was the science, quote unquote, of the mind in the past. So, back in the time, the most popular theories of the mind were the theological ones that had to do with the God who gave us soul, were mostly known as the dualism, which is the very strict dissociation between the mind and the body. The body is something physical, whereas the mind is something uncapturable by physical world. In Plato's theory, the soul had actually three separate components. It was the logos, the reasoning component, thymos, the component that had to do with anger, and eros, the component that had to do with desires. Aristotle, on the other hand, rejected the dualism, and he thought that any physical living thing has its own inherent quality of being the soul. So from these very vague and mostly based on divagation theories of the mind, around the 18th century, we started turning toward empiricism, which meant pretty much only trying to explain observable behaviors with more systematic thinking divagations. And finally, we came to the moment when we were more capable of describing or creating the science of the mind, which started with sort of Freudian psychological, analytical psychology. And although it was, the first most comprehensive attitude towards describing the mind, the science part of it is much questioned right now. Nevertheless, it was very important to treating the mind and the psyche as something that can be on which we can create complex theories. And then it came the turn towards the true physical scientific method. And I think for the science of the mind, the two very important parts that we're going to talk about today was first the findings on Brockhaus-Wernicke, which was finding parts of the brain that were explicitly responsible or important for language abilities. And the finding of Mr. Gustav Fechner, who is the father of psychophysics and signal detection theory. And we're going to start with the psychophysics and again do a little study. So I'm going to ask you to tell me when the color starts, when the color changes. So I'm going to change the color of the presentation several times, and just you can put it in the chat or whatever, or say it aloud when you think the color is different. Yeah. Okay. So I'm guessing it was somewhere around the last part. Okay, so if we did it on many people, we would find this moment at which the two colors started being distinguishable. Oops, I'm trying to see the videos. Up. So the colors changed continuously over time. However, if we do it very slowly, it's quite difficult or quite catchy to recognize the difference. This is called a staircase procedure. And this is how we define somewhat the sensitivity of people to the change in the color. And based on these measurements, Fechner was capable to define something called psychophysical function. So he changed some kind of physical property of the color or any other sensory thing like audio or something visual, and then measured subjective experience using several different procedures. And however easy that seems, it was a very fundamentally different approach to the mind at the time, because it was explicitly stating that we are capable of measuring subjective experience in any kind. And as much as we can, all of us heard about EEG and fMRI, we know that we are capable of capturing the subjective experience somehow. But back in the day, it was a revolutionary idea and allowed for the first time to quantitatively investigate the relationship between the physical stimuli and the sensations and perception they produce within our mental processes. And that was applicable to several different types of perception: the time perceptual, to smell perception, taste, visual, and auditory perception. And by establishing that relationship, we don't really care about what this equation says, but he said that the relationship between the S, the sensation, is some kind of mathematically capturable relationship between the physical sensation and this and constant that is that will sort of sorry, should I look at the chat?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to answer something in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's about this relationship that is described, graspable by some mathematical functions. And if you think about it a little bit more, it really reveals something fundamental about the mind. In this case, the mind is subject to the law of physics, to the law of mathematics. And it really breaks away from the idea that the mind is something absolutely uncapturable by any, human mind. And that mind is actually subject to anything, as much to the biology and physics and mathematics as any single part of our body. So this sort of gave rise to first studies on perception, and a little, to introduce what perception is. Very briefly, we have these 5 senses that all of us know: touch, vision, taste, smell, and hearing. And we have sensory organs that receives very specific physical information, and then are processed in our brain to, in the end, give rise to some subjective experiences based on this information. And there are 2 stages to it. First is the physical translation from the physical information to the other form of physical information that is understandable to our brain. So, for example, at the level of vision, we have translation of the light, the photons, into neural information. The level of taste, there's chemical information, and hearing is translating the movement of the air into subjective experience of the sound. And in cognitive psychology, we can develop ideas about any cognitive processes on 3 levels. I don't know if you remember it from the introduction: the psychological level, the biological level, and the sociological level. So if we take the perception on the example of that psychophysical function we learned about, we can look at it at the psychological level by describing the typical, the average psychophysical function of the population. We can look at the inter-individual differences, and to explain the inter-individual differences, we can use biology and describe the sensitivity of the cones and rods and how it affects that psychophysical function. We can look for answers in the organization of visual cortex, which is part of the brain that is responsible for vision, and see how that affects the way we are sensitive to changes in color. We can look at the sociological level and look for cultural differences and influences on perception of colors. And because besides the perceptual, like strictly perceptual part of seeing colors, there is a rich amount of information that is associated with colors, depending on what culture we live in. For example, in some countries, white is associated with peace and happy times, weddings, for example, while in other countries it's associated with funerals and the mourning of someone you've lost. And it appears that these associations are in most cases quite arbitrary, even though there are some associations that are very similar across cultures. And by studying these differences and how they affect the perception, how they affect our ideas, or how we react to using these colors in different situations, we can unhide how the brain is organized. And probably all of you have heard about painting the rooms green so that we feel more calm, or painting the prisons pink. I know that at some point there was a study that revealed that pink color has an effect, decreases the endurance of men. So they started painting prisons pink because they were hoping that it will decrease the violence that is happening in prisons. And so all of these ideas studied within cognitive psychology are sort of grouped within key concepts: perception, that I already introduced, language, memory, consciousness, thinking, attention, and intelligence. And initially, what I wanted to do is to go over each of these key concepts, introduce it, by book. But I decided against it. And right now, I'm going to introduce what happens when all of this goes wrong, when all of, because we didn't know right away how these things are organized within the brain. Mostly the first things we've learned were when something went horribly bad, and then we found out that when a certain part of the brain is missing, people are incapable of doing certain things. So I'm going to introduce a whole lot of things gone bad, and hopefully going to build some intuitions so that later when I introduce these ideas in the next class, it's going to make a little bit more sense. Are there any questions for now? Oh, it's okay. Okay. So since we started a little later, I'm gonna skip the break and do it later. Okay. Let's see if that's gonna work. We're going to start with auditory perception, and I'm going to ask you to first listen to the video, and then listen to the video again with your eyes closed.
Ba, ba, ba.
Okay. Can you write in the chat what did you hear? What sound did you hear? Yeah. Okay. Most of us agree that it's ba. Ah, okay. If you didn't catch that first ba, it's let's try again.
Ba, 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 ba.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll ask you now to close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. And I'll turn on the video again.
What do you think he's saying?
Again.
Ba,
Close your eyes.
ba, ba, ba.
Okay, what do you hear now? Yeah. Pa. But most of us is pa. So what do you think happened here? About anything with any intuitions about what's the effect? How is it that when you see the person speaking, it says one thing, and in the other situation, it's another?
I think we get some of the information about what people say from the visual part, even though we don't usually notice it. So the video was probably of him saying ba, but the sound was of him saying pa. Is that how it works?
Exactly, that's exactly how it works. And I think we've experienced it right now very clearly with people wearing masks. And when we have a lot of difficulties to understanding what people say, because on everyday basis, the visual input actually helps us a lot in how to understand what they say. And even as you said, we don't realize that we use these cues so much. It's actually almost essential to the singular percept that we develop. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next one, and I hope do you guys know it? I hope you don't. Okay, so whenever you know it, maybe you can read his lips. Yeah, you can skip it if you know it. So I'm going to ask you to tell me what do you hear.
Laurel, 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 laurel.
Okay, and tell me in the chat what did you hear? Yeah, I am totally Laurel, and I always feel Laurel, never hear Yanni. So as you see, there are some people that hear Yanni and some people that hear Laurel. And if I pronounce it, Yanni and Laurel, you can very clearly dissociate between the two sounds. And so how is it possible that the same exact word said is understood differently by different people? So as it turned out, and it was actually, I think, described by scientists from the DEC.
It was Daniel Prestitsa who exited the deck.
Yeah. So as it turns out, here is the so you don't really need to know what kind of representation that is. It's a time frequency representation of the sound. It's not really important. Just imagine that it's a representation, some kind of physical representation of the sound that we just heard. And so here you see that there is some component in the top and some component in the bottom part. And as it turns out, your personal sort of tuning towards the high part or the low part will decide on whether you hear Laurel or Yanni. And how he found out is that he sort of tuned, tuned down, as if he put this speaker part that was responsible for the top part a little bit lower. And it turned out, that the more lower part is retained in the sound, the more people hear. And here I don't remember which part. I think it was the low part is Yanni and the top part is Laurel, or the other way around. It's kind of Laurel on the bottom and Yanni on the top. I should have checked. You can guys check it in the paper Benza said. So as you see, it's almost an ambiguous sound. Your perceptual experience based on that input is purely dependent on the tuning of your sensory system. There are people who hear sometimes Laurel, sometimes Yanni, and there are people who always hear the same word. So it almost shows how freely your perceptual system is biased by whatever you experience. The sensory system is not a simple or an objective captioner of what's out there. Everything is filtered through our cognitive system that gives rise to different perceptual experiences. Okay, and this one is it's new. I haven't heard it before, but when I was preparing this one, I found this one. So Benza, I hope you don't know this one. And you guys tell me. So the first one, I'll ask you to read the word brainstorm on the left and tell me what you hear. Okay, and right now I will ask you to focus on the word green needle. And now alternate between the two. Could you alternate between the two easily? So we've seen the version where the visual input affects our perception when it's spoken, which somewhat makes sense because this is, the ability to see someone really helps, and speaking is much, ability to speak is much older than ability to read. But even such a novel ability as reading, because historically as human species we developed it much later, already influences the way we hear. So this is a very similar situation when you have an ambiguous sound that is, you only heard green needle. That's probably, that it must be that this sound is not ambiguous to you, which happens sometimes. Yeah, for me it worked really well too. So this is, okay, this is the auditory part. And I hate that this takes part of. And the last one, the visual one, which probably everybody saw. I would be surprised if someone here didn't see the dress. And the dress, the story of the dress goes like this. If you didn't see it, it's some girl sent the picture of a dress to her friend and asked some kind of question about it, and she received feedback from their friends saying, half of them said the dress is blue and black, and half of them said it's gold and white. And she was absolutely, stricken. She put the photo on media, and it absolutely blew up. And this is a very nice, example of how science works reactively to right now to what's posted on social media, because scientists right after try to explain what exactly happened in here. And I wonder whether you actually see. I think I see blue and black. I don't know what you see. But it is again a situation where interpretation of the outside, white and gold always, of the outside world comes into play. Whenever any visual input comes to your eyes, your brain processes it in order to make sense of it. Like our brain tries to make sense of everything. And in this particular situation, the trick here is that we don't know where the light comes from. And depending on what your interpretation, which is very variable between people, is the perception of the color will be. As in, if for you the light comes from behind, you will see the dress blue and black. And if for you light comes from like from the observer that looks at the picture, then you will see it as white and gold. And it's supposed to be visible on the left, but for me it's still blue and black. I don't know if for someone it changes over these three increments, but it is somewhat presentable on this optical illusion on the black. On the right. On the right, you can see a flat. Oh, Bensa does it. Nice. On the right, you can see a optical illusion called, I think, something bumps. Basically, it's a flat picture, but you can see like bumps that. Oh God, I don't remember the word English for it, but like a little bit outside of the screen and look a little hole in the screen. And do you have any ideas for why does it look like this? Same for me, Layla. It's just the luminous that changes for me. Do you have ideas for why do we see it the way we see it on the right? Oh no! And now I know why they hate online classes. The reason is that in our everyday world, the light comes from the sun, which is usually up there. So in our model of the world and how light works, the light illuminates everything from the top, and it has a very specific way then of shading the things around. And so the shading here would somewhat tells your brain that, oh, there is light from the bottom, there is lighter on the top and dark on the bottom, therefore the light must come from that part, therefore it has to have this kind of shape to give that kind of shading. And it's the same situation as the dress story, that you have some kind of model of the world within your head that has some kind of different rules about how the world works, and that affects the way you see the world all the time. So these were examples of these kind of perceptual ambiguities that that are affected by how our perceptual system is built. And but all of these are visible in healthy participants. And even though they told us a lot about how the brain works and how perception works, even what was most striking was what we learned from lesion studies. So let's go back to Wernicke and Broca. Usually French people know Wernicke and Broca because I think both of them are French and they're very proud of them. So Broca was a physician. Both of them were doctors that described, so by dissecting the brains of people that had the difficulty speaking in life, They pinpointed the part of the brain that was damaged, damaged in these patients. And by finding the common factor, we know like every person had the shape of the lesion a little bit different. When they found the common part of all of these lesions, it turned out, you know, that some of these areas are the ones that are lesioned in people who have difficulty speaking. And so Broca's area has been described as the one that is responsible for speech production, and Wernicke is as one that is responsible for word recognition. Patients that have lesions in these two parts lost the ability to speak or produce or understand speech in a little bit different ways. I'm going to show you now how, and you'll see the titles, but maybe you'll figure out by yourself.
And what did you used to do?
Worked Autodesk, seven sales and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there when you turn your head?
That's my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
So this man has had an injury that left him incapable to talk. He's actually already recovering from it, and he's regaining some ability to speak. But as you see, he has a lot of difficulties getting out the proper words. He understands what people talk to him, what are they saying to him, but he has difficulties forming the words as physical construct. And as you see in this part here, the Broca area, I don't know if it's my pointer, is actually responsible for the mechanical, like physical, motor command of producing the speech. However, when Wernicke's area is damaged, that's how they communicate.
Other people are working with them.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talk with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. They'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck, for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to get to
We will
Juneau.
store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
With the iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. It would happen. I would talk with Donna sometimes.
So you see, they have no difficulties producing the speech. All the words that they produce are understandable, but when you put them together, they don't really make sense. And here is again a patient that has already been tried to help to recover from his injury, but still, like, he has difficulties understanding what he's been asked. He has difficulties to reply, making sense to what's being told. Those are the two kinds of aphasia, right? And that are mostly common, or like the two kinds of aphasia that are most common. Aphasia can also be a developmental disorder. In some cases, it's reversible. And the first idea that these findings brought into the science of the mind is that there are, although this area was there before, that there are specific parts of the brain that do specific things. It really showed truly physical connection between a mental process and a physical physical mechanical part of the brain that does something very specific. And when it's damaged, that mental process cannot happen anymore. And it also brought an incredibly wider tools of helping these people, because they are not anymore retarded or crazy. they are aphakic patients who require very specific treatment and who have very specific condition that can be reversible. Same for kids with developmental disorder when they cannot acquire speech through, for example, because the brain maturates differently. Prosopagnosia is a disorder in which people lose the ability to recognize faces. And as it turns out, there is a very specific part of the brain that is responsible for perceiving, capturing of what the face means. And if you think about it, it could be just as any other object recognition, such as I see a phone and I call it a phone. So I connect the visual concept of what a phone is with some kind of mental concept of what a phone is. And in case of prosopagnosia, that association is very specific between the visual perception of a face and attachment to a concept of someone's face, while at the same time having maintained visual perception. So their vision and their visual perception of visual seeing is maintained properly. They have maintained memory, so it's not a problem of they're not remembering someone's face, and they have maintained recognition of any other objects. And we're going to see a patient who has that difficulty. So this woman had just been taking many pictures of
Not
her
even
mother.
her own mother's.
Of her mother. These pictures, she's known her mother for a long time, so I think she knows her face. She's just been taking her pictures, and these pictures right here have just been put in front of her.
Look at these,
and now she's asked to recognize her mother in the
picture you took or not.
Now, Massachusetts General Hospital researcher Dr. Nancy Etkoff shows Terry several Polaroids with only faces showing, and asks Terry to pick out her mother.
Okay, if you had to guess, which looks to you the most like your mother? Just looking now, you can't tell which one of these. None of these really look like your mother to you. No. Okay.
If you just cover up the face and I just look at the clothes, I can tell you.
Okay, do you want me to uncover them? Okay, why don't I do that? I'll uncover them so you can see what they're wearing and other parts of the picture.
And see, that's her, because the pink and purple shirt.
The shirt. You recognize the shirt.
Okay, so these patients develop some kind of strategies to deal with their incapability to recognize faces. For example, this woman recognizes people by their body. And prosopagnosia is a specific case of visual agnosia, which is the loss of ability to perceive objects in a very wide sense of what words perceive means. And if you want to read a bit more about it, I really recommend the book A Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, which talks about the situation of a man who has a visual agnosia. And so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the visual perception. So I haven't introduced that yet, but vision, brain is organized in big parts, and these big parts have very often quite specific roles. And there is a big part of a brain that is called the visual cortex that is responsible for vision. And when these different subparts of these visual cortexes do things very specific to vision. For example, one part is responsible for perceiving color. The other one is responsible for perceiving edges of visual objects, and another part is responsible for perceiving motion. And when that part of brain that is responsible for perceiving motion is damaged, people lose the ability to see in motion. They see the world frame by frame. And I will shortly. Sure, there's a lot of videos right now because they're very cute. And there's one episode in House that's shown exactly what echinotopsia is for people.
Joining my father for lunch. I should have called ahead for a table.
Dr. House was just
enjoying a Reuben. It's okay. After 10 years, anything that'll get doctors in the same room is...
What are you doing?
Nothing. What are you doing? Chips? Want to see something really cool? I saw you leaving last Tuesday. Practically tripped over 2 guys on your way out, but you had no problem opening doors. It's called echinotopsia. You can't see things when they move. Since you haven't been hit by a bus, I assume that it's intermittent. It's probably...
So in this case, the patient didn't have a permanently damaged brain, but his part of the brain that was responsible for seeing emotion was being disrupted when he had epileptic attacks. And this is, you know, you can imagine for people who have it all the time very disruptive disorder, because it's, you know, it makes them vulnerable to a lot of you know, a lot of things in the world, such as Dr. House said, driving buses or overfilling cups with water and so on. On the other hand, so this is so echinotopsia was a situation in when you lose some kind of perception because your brain was damaged. On the other hand, when all of that visual cortex is damaged, and we speak of cortical blindness, such patients don't have the ability to perceive, or, you know, consciously. They're basically blind. They still remain, some of them still remain some abilities to use visual information. And as weirdly as it sounds, you can see it in this video. So there is a man who is blind. He's been blind for years. And he's asked to walk down the corridor. And he's not told what's where. He's just asked to freely walk down the corridor. And as you see, he's not walking just straight, you know, on a straight line, but he walks, you know, tries to avoid obstacles on his way. When he's asked, why do we walk like this? He says, oh, I don't know, I just wanted to walk that way. He doesn't have any, you know, conscious aware knowledge about the visual scene. However, he's capable of using that some of that visual knowledge to guide his movement. And so how is that possible? It is possible because the information that is processed from the eyes before it gets to to visual cortex, it passes several stages that are called subcortical, which pretty much means that everything that is beyond, you know, the big folded part of what mostly we call brain. There are small parts that are very, you know, tiny and very specific, do very specific, or maybe very non-specific stuff. And so because that track is maintained, the brain is still capable of retrieving some of that visual information and using it to guide movement. So on one hand, we have situations when we have lost some very specific ability to see because of the damage to the brain. On the other hand, even though there was damage to the brain and would suggest that there should be no sight, brain is still capable of retrieving some information that can be useful for the person. And you can see a lot more if you look for online Wikipedia agnosias, and there is many very specific agnosias, and people with very strange very strange disorders. For example, amnesia, when people can't perceive music, or auditory agnosia, where people are incapable of perceiving speech as a distinct concept from any other sound. And however, how much lesion studies have helped us to understand the brain and the mind, and allowed us to make the almost first connections between the brain and the mind, they pose several limitations. One of the such limitation is that it always shows us a part of the brain that is crucial for a certain ability, but is not sufficient. It can be, for example, a part of the brain that is, one of the steps that is crucial for the sensor, the information flow to flow, but it is not the only part of the brain that is responsible. Maybe it's the part that gates information to a more, more superior or higher order part of the brain that is even more crucial for example, for speech or any other ability. So as much as we've loved lesion studies, they spurred thousands and thousands of studies afterwards, after they were first recognized. There are limits to it that we need to recognize. And so even if we were in a normal situation, let's say typical human being with correctly working visual and perception, vision, hearing, all of our perceptual systems are intact. There are still things that are happening sometimes that are biased, but are not optical illusions and do not depend on our sensory processing. So I'd like you to tell me what has changed about the two photos when I switched between the two. Any ideas? What has changed? Okay, now I'm going to do it again. All right, now, did you see any change? It's tree, yeah, the branch. Yeah. Anything else? Appearing in the clouds. So the zoomed out is it's just me not cropping properly. Okay, and now I'll try to show you up here. Look here. And then here. And then here. And then here. There's actually quite a lot of things that changed about the picture. And so if, like, forget the illusions, there's no illusion working here. Why is it that I don't see so many things about the picture? Another concept that spurs from that research and perception is that not everything is dependent on perception. There are higher order processes, what's called higher order processes, that sort of guide what we should see with full awareness. One of them is called attention. And the phenomenon that I just described to you, it's called change blindness. Is that when you see a picture, you somewhat stabilize it in your internal representation, and unless the change is big, you will retain that presentation as quite correct over time. So even though there was quite a lot of things that changed in here, And if I do it a few times, you probably can see it quite better right now. We still didn't, we had difficulties to finding them. So not only is it that our perception is not objective, it is very much biased by our internal models and how the perceptual system is built. There are also higher order processes that still affect how we see the world. And but you know, sometimes I can choose to pay attention to something and very closely observe it. And how does it work then? I have a lot of videos. All of these attentional resources that are very that guide our perception are used by all of magicians to trick us. So I'll ask you to pay really close attention to this magic trick and tell me what is the trick behind it. If you can move your attention to the magic trick and find what was it.
Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, do a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing color-changing card trick.
Okay, did you guys figure out what was the trick? Answer say no. No. Any ideas? No, not even the slightest. Okay, because the videos was not about actually about the trick. It was about something else. And now let's see what it was about. All right, so who saw the changes during the time? Come on, tell me. Did you guys see the changes? No. Me neither when I first saw it. It is a phenomenon that maybe some of you know from a gorilla study, where people are asked to count how many times people pass the ball between them, and then a gorilla comes in, but none of them actually sees it. And none of the people who are asked to count the passes of the ball recognize the gorilla that is apparently in exactly the gorilla experience. So this is exactly the same situation. This is called inattentional blindness. It was actually predicted by a scientist, philosopher from Université de Descartes. Right now it's, I think, University of Paris, where he actually predicted it from his philosophical framework of consciousness. It is a situation where you put a certain amount of attentional resources to perceive a very specific part of the visual scene, and therefore do not recognize that there are things happening outside of it. And I think all of us had it in the life when you drive the car, try to read a message, and then don't recognize that something happened on the road. That's why they always tell you to never text and drive. And so these now attentional limits of our experience really show us that there is not only what we see, there is also what we choose actively to see, and it spurs a whole new research on what is the human experience and what is the human mind. And one of the very important introduction studies that introduced the idea that attention and paying attention to what you see is important was that gorilla study. But then again, another leg of the research was done on so-called split brain patients. Split brain patients are patients that had their corpus callosum cut. And corpus callosum is a tissue in the brain that connects to hemispheres. So I'm not sure you've ever seen a brain or any picture of a brain. It's usually you can see two halves of it. They're called hemispheres, and they're connected through corpus callosum. This allows the two parts for communication. And in some patients, in some epileptic patients, it's sometimes cut in order to avoid epileptic seizures. Right now, it's not done so often. It's done because it stops seizure to spread across two hemispheres. Because what seizure is a very rhythmic activity of one part of the brain, and that activity is taking over the rest of the brain. So if you cut the corpus callosum, it doesn't allow that activity to jump on to the other part of the hemisphere. And although it works very well, it has quite a few drawbacks. First drawback comes from, again, the inability to, or actually the limited ability to pay attention to the visual scene. We haven't done that yet, but you're going to see that in the Introduction to Neuroscience, where the right part of the brain controls everything on the left part of our body, and the left part of the brain controls everything on the right part of the body. When such split brain patient is put in front of a screen, is asked to keep focus in the middle of the screen and pick up a tool that that he sees on the screen. For example, when he sees ring, he should pick up the ring in front of him. What's important, he sees these tools, but they are under the screen, and the hands are under the screen, as you see. At the same time, he's asked to say out loud what he's seeing. So, as you remember, right part of the vision, left part of the brain, left part of the visual scene, right part of the brain. When he's asked to do that, split brain patients say out loud the thing they see on the right side, the ring, but they pick up with the left hand, so controlled by their right hemisphere, they pick up what they see on the left part of the screen. So you see that this is the ambiguation. They are not aware that they see the word key, but they still are capable of picking it up with the left hand. This is this finding for the first time showed what was actually hypothesized even back in times by Fechner, so the guy from the psychophysics, that when you split two parts of the brain, they start sort of organizing within themselves. It is not very clear at the moment right now how actually it's happening, but it's thought right now that the left part of the brain is the one that speaks, and the right part is the one that even before the split was not capable to speak. Therefore, it is not capable of sending the motor command to say the word key. So they think that so another thing is that when you actively ask them to pay attention to the word key, they will be capable of recognizing the word key, that it's there, and that they're picking it up. However, spontaneously, they're not capable of recognizing that it's there. So this is one part of the finding that sort of shows that, you know, paying attention to a certain part of the physical world is crucial for you to have a subjective experience of that part of the world. However, as I told you, like the way we control our body is not very, it's not symmetric apparently either. Like the left part has full control over the speech, and the right part doesn't really speak. What happens in situations like that sometimes is called the alien hand syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And of course, Dr. House has showed it again because he's the best.
Still trying too hard, huh? Trying to get your other half
So
to
this is a
like me.
patient that
Don't
came to
say
the
that,
hospital,
okay?
and he's talking to his girlfriend.
Which means that it...
And he's kind of just throwing things that she just brought for
I shouldn't
him.
read into that.
Antifungal meds? Ordinarily, we'd put them in your IV, but since your right brain doesn't seem too fond of IVs, you should be feeling better in a few days. I have to get back to work. Rick says your shift will be waiting for you when you get back.
Thanks. Oh my God. God, I'm sorry.
So apparently, in the right hand of this patient really doesn't like his girlfriend. What's thought in this situation is that the right brain that has the power over left part of his body is doing things that are organized, like these are goal-oriented movements. So he's not ataxic, so he didn't lose ability to control his body because these goal-oriented movements. However, they are in opposite of what the left brain wanted to do. And these patients, I mean, the syndrome is quite well described because there has been quite a few patients that had this syndrome. Somehow, with time, the connections between the two hemispheres regrow, and they regain the control over their left hand. But somehow, sometimes it never goes away, and these people forever lose their connection to their right brain part. And surprisingly and interestingly, it only ever happens to the left hand, and not the whole part of the left body, which is very confusing. So this is the end of the interesting studies part, and we're going to take a 10 minutes break right now, and after that we're going to go over perceptual systems and how they're built and how they work. So let's say we meet back at 8:25. Okay, I guess we're gonna start back. It's 8:26. Okay, so far we've seen how the idea of the mind and the brain as a processing unit has been developed. We've seen that the lesion study had provided crucial information about the organization of the brain and its connection to mental processes. We've seen that that cognitive psychology as a science allows for objectification, quote unquote, like we're trying to objectify internal processes and use several different behavioral measures in psychology or neurophysiological measures in neuropsychology to describe the mind. It allowed for recognition of physical causes of mental disorders, which in turn allowed for more precise diagnosis and specific treatment. And what's I think most important change in the perspective was that we don't see the mind as a passive processing unit, not passive nor perfect receiver of sensory information, and instead actively influencing the outside world with the additional use of the sensory information. Therefore, any perception, be it a visual or social perception, is not objective. And so what we're going to do in that second part, it's going to be quite short. We're going to go over different perception system. There really it's how it's built, integrated in the brain as a processing unit. It's going to be quite short. It's going to be like probably 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to finish for today. Okay, we're going to start with visual perception. We spoke a lot about this one. We're starting with the sensors in the system, which are the eyes, which have sensing cells, which are rods and cones that receive information incoming as light. Then this information is processed throughout the network with, as I told you before, some subcortical areas and cortical areas, and then processed in the auditory cortex. Within the auditory cortex, it's roughly organized within two streams. The ventral, so the bottom stream sort of, is called the what stream, which is responsible for identification of the visual objects. So basically, how is it that what I see is what I see? How is the cup that I see is the cup? And where stream, which is responsible for placing the thing you see within the spatial visual scene in respective to me. And this visual cortex is, as I mentioned before, organized in subparts, when each subpart has very specific computational or algorithmic role, and to then give rise to more organized processing unit. So that, like as I mentioned a little bit, there is part of the brain that is responsible for very basic low-level features of the auditory of the visual scene, such as colors, such as orientation of the edges in the picture. There are more complex parts where responsible for perceiving colors, and even more responsible for perceiving motion or direction of motion. So there will be part of the brain that is responsible for just detecting any kind of motion, and there will be part that is sensitive to the specific direction of motion, for example, from left to right side. Auditory unit starts, as you probably know, in the ear, where the air causes vibration of several units that then causes flow of a fluid within the cochlea, and then is then translated into neural signal. The information is then sent through several subcortical areas to auditory to auditory cortex. Each of these parts is organized what is called tonotopically, which is in referral to its acoustic features. Acoustic features of sounds are the ones that are based on its physical features, such as frequency or the amplitude. Taste and olfactory perception is based on perceiving of chemicals. Olfactory perception is based, is sort of classified into four most basic flavors: bitter, sour, sweet, and salty. And some people now show additional proof for a taste called umami, which is associated with meat. And the olfactory bulb is the one that is based, in your nose, and as the only one within the sensory system, olfactory system does not pass through the brainstem, so the lower part here of the brain that is in your neck, so somewhere in your neck, but is connected directly to subcortical areas. Somatosensory perception is basically anything that you sense about your body. There are receptors in your skin and inside your body that then send information to the brain, to a very specific part of the cortex called somatosensory cortex. Which theory of the taste? Oh, this is like this kind of, you see like how all of them are mixed. So sort of to show you a little bit when you put an electrical stimulation on your tongue and stimulate these parts of the brain, these parts of the tongue, they somehow sometimes give rise to this kind of flavors, but it's not one-to-one mapping, and it's sort of more to how to think about flavor than directly what the flavor is. But yeah, you're right. It's not exactly how it's organized. What's important is that it's translation of chemical information to a neural system. Is that okay? I'm not super knowledgeable about taste perception, though. I think it's one of the least also developed parts of the science as well, because it's quite difficult to study. It's quite unethical to have people taste different things, and then difficult to measure in the brain, although right now it's being more and more accessible. I don't know if you guys heard, there were people that were capable of creating a memory of a flavor not a flavor of a smell in a mouse. Basically, they co-activated part of an olfactory bulb with electric shock, or some kind of negative reinforcer, and so that animal never actually smelled any smell, but had just artificially been co-activated when it was experiencing unpleasant stimuli. That animal later on, when it actually smelled that smell, was avoiding it. So it was introduced as a capability of creating memories in mice.
And I add the interesting thing about olfaction to add that you said that it's from the least understood ones, and just to add to that, there's recently a study that just by accident seemed to discover that a part of the brain, the olfactory bulb, which we think should be absolutely integral, basically it should be the what the visual cortex is to vision, and a lot of like around 0.6% of women do not have it and have perfect olfaction. So like a good portion of people, especially women,
olfactory bulb at all.
Yes, yeah, they don't. They just don't have it. It's as small as to be basically indistinguishable in MRI images, and they mostly left-handed women, I think, and they just have no problem smelling at all. So clearly, there's a lot of stuff we don't really get about this.
And that's also weird because this is probably one of the oldest, phylogenetically sensory system. Ability to sense chemicals is, something that bacteria have.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, and we understand very, very little of it, really.
Yeah, it's probably a lot of it is just due to plasticity, I suppose, that in these people, like other parts of the brain might take up the role just to be able to function. But
yeah, okay, so technical question: is olfactory bulb of specific Brodmann area? Okay.
I mean, probably.
We'll continue later.
I don't know. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a specific Brodmann area. It should be relatively easily localized in MRI, I think, but I don't know which Brodmann it would correspond to.
Okay, interesting. Okay, you see, guys, we all learn together. Okay, so going back to the somatosensory perception. Very, shortly, there are specific sensors in your skin and on your organs that react to different type of stimulation, either to stretching, for example, on the skin, to stretching, to vibration, to pressure, lighter or more. And all parts of your brain are wired to a specific part of your all parts of your body are wired to a specific part of your brain called somatosensory cortex, and you can localize the representation, the cortical representation of your body along the somatosensory cortex. And this guy here is known as the homunculus. I think the most common name is that this is how your body would look if we would only look at the cortical representation of it. What it actually means is that there is a higher proportion of the brain that represents for example, the face and the mouth and the hands than your arms. You can sort of test it a little bit on yourself by measuring the sort of resolution of your recognition of touch. If you close your eyes and, well, it's better if someone does it on you, and they touch you on your face, for example, you are capable of, detecting. And again, you remember all the psychophysics, the detection theory, like how you're sensitive to changes in sensory information. So you will be more sensitive to change on your face than you will be on your arm. It's a little bit makes sense that we need more information for our face and arms than the rest of our body. You can sort of we can rationalize it using this kind of evolutionary approach. Is that we need to know exactly what we eat. Therefore, the physical information that comes from the organ that we eat with is very important to us. The hands we use to so many things. Therefore, to have accurate representation of the sensations from our hands is very important for us, and allow us to do many things. For example, create tools. So we're going to finish a bit early on this perceptual stuff, and next week we're going to go in a little bit the dissociation between, the dissociation or the lack of dissociation between the animal and human mind, and how cognitive neuropsychology helps us to answer some of the questions on how is it possible that elephants can recognize themselves in the mirror, or how is it possible that humans have that unique ability for language. And I hope it wasn't absolutely horrible, and thank you for coming. Oh, unless there are any questions. I think we're good. Okay. I'll leave 5 more seconds. Questions?
No questions. Just thank you. That was really nice and clear and just perfect. So thank you so much, and see you next time. Thank you.
See you next time. Okay then. Thank you guys, and see you next week, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you.